one good story in them, which is their story of their life. And when you are starting out, those are the stories you write about. And I think that was considered to be, the proper thing to do. That's what socially responsible people did. You addressed your life and your issues.
Loneliness has followed me my whole life, everywhere. In bars and cars, sidewalks, stores, everywhere. There's no escape from God's lonely man.
At the beginning of the 70s, when the studios had absolutely no idea of what to make, if a director came in with a project and said, this project's going to make money, the studio is not going to say no. And so suddenly, these kids who had been taught in film school that the essence of directing was self-expression, got to make their movies for the first time. It really never happened before. You could never make a movie like Taxi Driver. I mean, it was amazing that Taxi Driver got made within the system.
I and Scorsese and De Niro each had some success in other films. And so then it got to the point where Columbia said, well, look, if everyone is saying somebody else should make it, why don't we make it? The price is right, it's low, we'll take the chance. So the difference is that even though that was hard, the studios did make those films.
You make the move. It's your move.
Outside of whatever charisma De Niro has.
You talking to me?
I can't think of anybody less sympathetic than Travis Bickle.
You talking to me?
You cross the street to get away from this guy.
Well, who the hell else are you talking? You talking to me?
Plus, it ends with this unprecedented carnage, which is extraordinary even now. I mean, if you watch I watched the film a few months ago, and it's still like probably one of the most violent scenes in American cinema. Any studio in the right mind would be mad to make a film like that, and yet the film did very well, only in the 70s.
I would differentiate a lot between what Marty was doing and what I was doing, and say what George Lucas was doing and Steven Spielberg was doing. Because George and Steven really came from a very kind of populist, middle American point of view and wanted to make movies that would move everybody. And Marty wanted to make movies that moved himself.
I think there's another contradiction in all this, which is that when you look at a director like Coppola, who's committed in all sorts of ways to, in his own work and through zoetropes, through the work of others, to making personal cinema, I think it's actually arguable that his so-called commercial movies, like The Godfather, are of a more personal nature than his so-called art movies.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee. Even though my wife is godmother to your only child. But let's be frank, you never wanted my friendship. And you were afraid to be in my debt.
The first couple of days with Brando, I remember getting a call from Bob saying, well, are we going to subtitle this? Because, Marlon talking like this, and they didn't know what the hell he was saying. On top of which, the opening scene when he was petting the cat, the opening scene petting the cat was a cat that was laying around the studio. And so the cat started purring, and all you heard was the cat purring and Brando mumbling something, and they start freaking out. And it was dark, and it was very unsettling to people on the West Coast.
I believe in America. America has made my fortune.
When we were mixing the movie, he asked Bob Evans and I, he said, if this movie does over $60 million, will you guys buy me a car, a Mercedes? We all both said, absolutely. If $60 million will buy you a Mercedes. The day the movie did $60 million and $1, I got a call from the president of Mercedes-Benz of North America, who wanted to substantiate that, in fact, I was going to pay half for a special car that Mr. Coppola had ordered. And I said, had ordered? He said, we're only going to build 3 next year, he said. One for Franco, one for the Pope, and one for Mr. Coppola. It was going to cost like $70,000.
In January 1973, with box office earnings of over $81 million, The Godfather became the biggest grossing film of all time.
Francis and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg did become the dominant force in Hollywood for a number of years, and still are the dominant force in Hollywood in one way or another. It was a generation that had its finger on some very specific pulse. But I'd even differentiate Francis from Lucas and Spielberg, who really were just, you know, kind of tapped into the American psyche.
With Spielberg, you see, was a different thing. He comes from television, and we met in the early 70s, but he was a very different kind of person.
When I turned 19, I made a movie in 35 millimeter called Amblin, and that movie was seen by the then head of TV at Universal Studios, Sid Sheinberg, who's now head of the studio. And he saw the film, was impressed, asked me to come to his office to meet him, and he sort of bedazzled me by offering me the 7-year term contract and attempted to put me to work directing professional television shows. Bill, step back this much. If I did learn one thing from TV, it taught me to think quickly on my feet, to prepare, to plan, to know what I want to do when I get to work in the morning so that I can accomplish the job. And TV for me wasn't an art form, it was a job. I actually, because of television, didn't know for a while there whether or not I wanted to continue making film, because I felt that it was like working at a sweatshop. And I wasn't getting any of that stimulation, that gratification that I even got making 8mm war movies when I was 12 years old. And I didn't have that passion because television sort of smothered the passion. It's only when I got into feature films, actually when I got into TV movies and made Duel, that I kind of rediscovered the fun about making films.
What's your name, sir?
David Mann.
How do you spell that, please?
M-A-N-N, that's 2 N's. I'd like to report a truck driver that's been endangering my life.
Your name again?
David Mann.
Duel was a film that was discovered in theaters overseas. And I remember taking my first trip to Europe. I'd never been out of the US before. And going to Europe for the first time to do publicity for Duel and discovering a lot of people out there who love movies. I'm talking about the journalists, the writers, loved movies, cherished films, much more than I ever sensed that the American journalists loved and cherished pictures. But it was, sort of idealized and idolized and lionized, and I felt wonderful about that. And I said to myself, gee, there really is a generation overseas that loves movies with a passion.
He once mentioned to me that he liked to make, there were films and there were movies, and he liked to do films, never knowing he would become the biggest movie maker of all time.
That's a 20-footer.
I think with Jaws, because it came from a #1 best-selling novel, that Universal gave a little more top spin to the advertising program, but no more so than they gave to the other 12 films they had coming out that year. I know that they didn't spend any more money on that film than they did on any other film in terms of publicity. Only after Jaws was a hit the first week in theaters, Universal began chasing the success to keep the film in the awareness of the public.
It was the massive worldwide success of Jaws which put the idea of the blockbuster movie firmly on the map.
People didn't really talk about blockbusters that much in those days. That was an idea that began to take shape in the early to mid-70s. The public doesn't realize that the character, what makes a picture a blockbuster is the willingness of people to see it 2 or 3 times, like Star Wars or Jaws. There are not enough people who go to movies out there to make something $100, $200 million picture unless you see it, there's that habit audience. So all of a sudden, By the mid-70s, the movie industry was traumatized. The pot of gold began to take shape, and studios began to say, aha, can't we open a picture in more theaters and spend more money to advertise? And the whole interior dialogue in studios was distorted and I think corrupted irrevocably.
I made Star Wars. It was a very difficult film to make. There was a lot of problems involved. There was very little money, very little time. I finished it. I showed it to my friends. They said, oh, gee, George, I really feel sorry for you. This is too bad. Better luck next time. And then it became an even bigger hit. But I had absolutely no idea that it was going to be a blockbuster.
I have you now. What?
It opened a year after the end of the Vietnam War, and I think the country had gone through such a trauma of being divided, the left against the right, the pro-war and anti-war, had been at each other's throats for so many years and with such bitterness that everyone was looking for an opportunity to find something they could share in common and feel good about and unite around. George told me, what I'm really making here is sort of like a Disney movie. So he said, Disney films always make $16 million. You could look at every picture they've ever released, they make $16 million. This picture is costing around 10. So there's no way we're going to break even on the film. He says, but I think that with the merchandising of products related to the film, we may be able to break even.
Star Wars, for the first time, brought in the concept of that a film represented a franchise, that every movie could be sold in all of its little parts. There were products. There was product placement. Every movie became an industry unto itself. That was something that no one envisioned, say, in 1970.
I can remember at the time of Carrie, which was a success but not a blockbuster, that there was a sense with De Palma that he was obviously pleased by the response to the film, but frustrated that, I think, possibly because of it, he felt the marketing hadn't been quite strong enough, that he felt Carrie could have done more. And there was an extraordinary desire to emulate the others and have this phenomenal success, which I suppose to some extent he had later with The Untouchables.
You can't really be that experimental or that odd or idiosyncratic or follow your muse to some absurd end if you're trying to open in 1,000 theaters or 2,000 theaters and, you know, do $30, $20 million a weekend. So that's a bit of a problem, and once you get that fever in your blood, it's hard to get it out.